Hi everyone, it's Lori and welcome to the channel. Today's episode is for my flower photographers out there. I want to give you a couple tips to consider when you're editing flower images that you've taken either in a studio setting or out in nature. So these are going to be just some simple techniques that you can use right here in Lightroom to really make an impact on your images. So first, I have this camellia flower that I shot. And I've done some cropping, and as I look at this image, I can tell this is supposed to be a pretty white flower. The second thing I notice is that this leaf is very bright, and it kind of distracts from the flower. So I want to target those two things. So my first tip is when you're editing your flower images, look for things in the four corners or around your subject that may be distracting. Do they call attention? And then think about how to fix those. The second tip is to always consider the color of your flower. Now, if you're shooting something that's white or cream, it will naturally pick up colors that are in the landscape. So you're going to want to adapt those. So let's jump in and fix these two areas as we edit this flower. So the first way to work on the color and the color tones of your flower would be to think about the tint and temperature. So I'm going to come down to the tint slider and I'm just going to remove some of that magenta. You can see instantly it gets rid of those pink tones. So that's an easy way to initially kind of target the color tones in your image. Now to really work on this, I'm going to come up to our mask and I'm going to do a subject mask. Now let's see how well it does for us. Now it did select the leaf as well. So what I'm going to do is do a subtract objects. I'm going to actually use the brush here. Let's enlarge it. And I'm just going to go over it so that it removes the leaf from our selection. So we'll let it process. And if we go back to our mask now, it is just our flower. So it's as easy as that. Okay, so now that we have just our flower selected, I could also remove the center of the flower if I wanted to. So let's go ahead and do that. Subtract objects. We're going to use that brush again. And I just want to not impact that yellow area. All right, so now if we go back to our mask, there we go. We've got it all done. So what I want to do now is come down to our saturation and I want to just drag it down. I want to remove any color saturation. So if you look at before, it has a little bit of some color, and then if you come down, that is really removing it. Now the next thing I could do would be to bump the whites just a little bit, which is also going to brighten the white part of the flower. And then I'm going to lower the highlights just a tiny bit. So I want to keep the brightness. I'm going to brighten that center, but I also don't want it to be too much. So a really nice difference between, let's go back and look at our mask. This is going to be before and this is after. So it's just giving it that true white look. So those are two ways that you can impact your actual flower. You can, of course, use the tint temp sliders, and then, of course, you can do a subject mask to really make an impact. Now, the next thing I want to do is tackle this leaf right here. And so, again, I'm going to use the mask tool. So let's create a new mask. Objects is my favorite. I'm going to come in and just get that all selected. You don't have to be precise with this. It's going to use the AI technology to detect it. And let's look at that overlay. There we go. That's perfect. All I'm going to do is bring down the highlights. And I could also darken it just a little bit. There we go. That matches the background much better and really helps with that. Now, I also notice a couple other areas. So I'm going to do a linear gradient. I'm going to come in from this corner, and then I'm just going to darken and reduce the highlights in that corner. And then I'm going to do another mask, grab the brush. Let's enlarge our brush, and I'm just going to brush over this area that has some bright highlights. And we're going to come down and reduce the highlights in that area. All right, so those are two ways that I would look at the corners of my image and anything that's distracting, as well as impacting the color tones in an image, especially something that's white. All right, let's work on a second image. And I'm going to jump over to this one, and we're going to talk about a couple things here that I would consider when editing this flower. So this is another camellia bloom. I just love capturing these. They just look like icing to me. So as I look at this image to edit it, there's a couple things that are distracting from the scene. The first is this branch, and so I absolutely want to remove that. There's also some other foliage over here that's a little rough. So the first thing that I'm going to do is crop the image. So my tip for this image is you always want to look at your edges. I find when I do competition reviews, when I look at portfolios of photographers, that often that is the piece that's missing. So always check those out. For this image, I'm just going to crop this left side, and that just puts the center of my flower in the center, and it also then helps me not have to deal with that distraction. Now, the second thing I want to do is go ahead and remove this branch. Now, I'm going to try to use the content aware remove, and we may have to go over it a couple times, but we're going to give it a try. And we're just going to go over it multiple times. Now, I do have the opacity all the way up, and that's looking pretty good. What I'll do is just go over it in kind of different directions. And then you could also use the clone tool if you wanted, but I think we're getting there. It's gotten nice and soft. And what a difference to not have that in our way. Just think it makes a really, really big difference before and after, and it just took a couple quick steps. Now, if you use Photoshop, you could take this image into Photoshop and you could remove this also, this stem. It's a little distracting, but I want to keep this video today all about Lightroom. Now, you could try the remove tool here, the content aware, but I don't think it's going to do a great job. So the way I would go around that is first we can go up to our basic editing panel, and I'm going to come down and start with a vignette. I want to really kind of darken those edges and bring the emphasis to the center of my flower. Now, I also notice a little bit of green down here, so I'm just going to go back to the content remove, and I'm just going to remove that. That's just going to clean up that end and make that look a lot nicer. Now, I still see some of the highlights and the green around here. It's not distracting too much, but it's also a little bright. So let's go ahead and use our mask tools. Let's do a subject mask, and hopefully it selects just our flower. Great. Now I'm going to come into this mask and I'm going to invert it. So that way we now are working on the outside of our image. And what I'm going to do here is lower the highlights, just bring those down. I'm also going to bring down the exposure. And we could also shift that green color if we wanted to. So maybe make it just a little more true green and then bring down the saturation just to minimize it is what I'm trying to do. I think that that is really nice and a lot better. Okay, so let's go back here. Now, what I did by doing that is I got rid of some of the light that was originally on the flower coming from this direction. So we can just go back, add a linear gradient mask. I'm going to come in, kind of angle it like that. And now we can just open the exposure just a little bit. Sorry about that. Pup is crying. We can open up the exposure just a little bit. And we could also think about our temp here, bringing in some of those pink tones. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually add another mask. Let's do another linear gradient. I'm going to come up from the bottom. And I'm going to come straight down to our tint. And I'm just going to bring in a little bit of that pink in that bottom corner, just to really accentuate that. So it's still dark and moody, but it is giving us that look and the color tones that are in our flower image. Now, I probably would darken this side just a little bit more, but I think this is a good start. And from here, you could go in and do some cleanup if you wanted to on your little flower. So you could come in and remove a few of these dark spots unless you want to keep it really natural. It's up to you. Sometimes I keep flowers as they are, and sometimes I come in and really clean them up. So you can just decide if something is distracting. A couple of these spots are a little bit distracting, so I'm just gonna clean those up just a little bit and just make this beautiful camellia stand out. Maybe this bottom area, just a touch, little spot there. And then the last thing that I typically do with almost all my flower images, let me see if I can fix this petal up here. We got it a little bit. Let's use the heal tool and see if we can come in, and just heal that area. Let me undo that and undo that one. Bring that in. I might be just messing it up, but let's go back to the content aware. Just going to put a dot right there. See if I can get rid of that. So sometimes I make a mess with this tool and it can really get in your way, but just keep going over it until you're happy with it. I'm going to make it really small and just do that and see if I can get it fixed. Okay, that's better. So the last step I would do for this image is I would go back to my mask. I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to use the objects, and I think I'll just use the brush. I'm just going to brush in the center area. And now I'm going to, now that that brush is selected, I'm going to open up the shadows, and I'm just going to add a little kiss of exposure. Just a tiny pop is kind of all it needs to open up those dark areas. Could also add a little bit down here. No, that's not going to work. So I'm going to delete that one, get rid of that, and we'll just leave it up at the top. All right, so that's going to be it for this image. I am really happy. This was before and this was after. Now, I like my greens a little darker and I like things to be a little bit moodier. So that's just my preference, but the editing tips and tricks that I'm giving you, you can use on any image, and you can create your own story with your image based on your preferences for color, tone, and light. So I hope these helpful tips are useful for you, and that when you are editing a flower image during spring or any season, that you will think about the four corners of your image and how to remove and work with some of those distracting elements. Thanks so much for watching.